Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Julie Lytle, the Director of Distributed and Lifelong Learning at Bexley Seabury Seminary, and the moderator for tonight's conversation. Connie Pearson Campbell and Roxanne Klingensmith and I are happy you've joined us to talk with Deacon Barbra Weza to learn about her growing supports and advocacy for people who are homeless. Deacons Talking on the Road to Emmaus is a web-based series for deacons to talk with each other and share stories of support and invigorating ministries that are happening all around the country. It's inspired by the story of Cleopas and the other disciple who, after recounting all that they had experienced while walking on the road to Emmaus with a stranger, realized that it was Jesus in their midst. We find Jesus's presence in our midst all of the time, helping us to relieve our fears and grief and celebrate the ministries that we have. And we are sponsoring this tonight with the Association for Episcopal Deacons and Bexley Seabury's Pathways for Lifelong Learning, so that you can hopefully take some inspiration and joy with you into the field. These programs happen the second Thursday, I need to change my script. They happen the second Monday of every month from 8:30 to 9:30 Eastern Time, and they feature deacons sharing stories from their ministries. We've learned that next month on March 8th, we'll have Nancy Ford talking with us about family systems. Just a quick reminder, tonight's conversation is being recorded and will be available for your viewing at the Province One website, as well as the Bexley Seabury website. And I'll put the link in the chat again as well. Please use chat to offer comments to Barbara, as well as to Connie and Roxy and I, and we'll make sure to keep the conversation going. There will also be a point in time when Barbara will be inviting you to offer comments and questions and suggestions. So watch for the directions. And Connie, Roxy, would you please open us with prayer? And then Barbara, you can start and tell us about yourself. So thank you again.
Let us pray. Creator, we give you thanks for all you are and all you bring to us, for our visit within your creation. In Jesus, you place the gospel in the center of this sacred circle through which all of creation is related. You show us the way to live a generous and compassionate life. And this evening, we give great thanks for Barbara, who will talk about her ministry with a precious group of people we know you love, those that have no place to lay their heads. Give us strength to come together this evening in respect and commitment to each other, and help us to continue to grow in your spirit. For you are God now and forever. Amen.
Barbara, we know you've been a lifelong advocate for the homeless and have been now the executive director doing some phenomenal things in a pandemic. We'd love for you to give us a little bit more of your history and background and share the story of what you've been able to accomplish.
Thank you, everybody. And it's a pleasure to be here tonight. A little bit of background about me. My background is in education and in nonprofit social services, and have had the opportunity to do ministry and to serve a wide variety of populations, including families with children, families with disabilities, senior citizens, the homeless population, and an immigrant population as well. I am going to say that I would say probably about in 2006, I was called to this ministry, serving, and it was before I had discovered the Episcopal Church. People tell me that I sort of discovered the Episcopal Church coming through the back door. There was a feeding program happening in the community, and I was the advisor for one of the meal teams, and was asked to be coordinator of that. And my first thought was, I need help. And so I started going to where I felt most comfortable. I went to churches and just started doing some pulpit speaking and inviting invitations and telling people what we were doing in this building. And it just blossomed from there. The first year, God blessed us with 6 churches. The second year, we had 10, and it grew from there. Today, we have 18 churches and community organizations that provide a meal program here, even through a pandemic. It may look a little different, but it has continued through the pandemic. In 2015, after I had become a member of St. David's Church, St. David's, these are all ministries of St. David's Church, and St. David's decided that they wanted to form a nonprofit agency. And so they called a priest in charge, Father Joe Michael, and he came and took a step-by-step of how to create a nonprofit agency here. We were providing all of the ministries out of the parish hall building at that time, which is a 6,000 square foot building that was an old Masonic hall, and the church had used it to put on musicals and Bible school and many, many things back in the 70s and 80s. However, the church was, all the families had grown up and they were moving away. And so the church wasn't using this building anymore. And so we continued to provide the ministries, and we formed the nonprofit in 2015. We became official using the asset building community development model by Jim Green. And with the philosophy that everything in our community is an asset, people, places, agencies, businesses, churches, every person and every agency in town is an asset to what we do here. We're located in Shelton in Washington. That's in rural Mason County in Washington. We have a population here of 10,167, and Mason County has a population of 66,000, almost 67,000. I'm going to stop here for just a moment and say a prayer for me as I try and share my presentation. Oh gosh.
I think you need to open the PowerPoint. You don't want to launch a meeting again. Would you like me to share it for you?
That would be great if you could do that. Thank you so much, Julie.
Sure. I'm going to stop and open your PowerPoint. Here we go.
Thank you very much.
So just tell me when to go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. Am I able to turn? There we go. Okay. Let's go to the second page. Who is Community Lifeline?
Where is that?
The second page from the top.
Yeah, back up to the second. There
Oh,
you
that
go.
one.
Right
Thank
there.
you.
Thank you. So Community Lifeline's mission is to provide food, clothing, shelter, case management, job training, education resources to support those in need. Again, before the COVID, in 2019, before the COVID pandemic, 15% of Mason County residents were living below the poverty line. Compared with the 10% statewide and 13% nationwide. In 2017, this building that we had served the ministries in for many, many years and supported for many, many years was offered to our nonprofit by St. David of Wales Parish Hall to purchase and continue expanding and developing the ministries here at St. David's or at Community Lifeline. We did a capital campaign, and in less than a year, the community paid the building off, which was an answer to prayer and an affirmation that we were doing what we should be doing in this building. Go ahead.
It's not letting me. There we go.
Thank you. Who do we serve at Community Lifeline? We serve the community. We serve those in need, the unemployed, underemployed, homeless adults with children, 18 plus years. We serve about 55% senior citizens, about 12% veterans, people with disabilities, people affected by domestic violence, youth or young adults, people affected by mental illness. In fact, about 80% of those we serve here are affected by mental illness. We serve about 65% affected by addiction. We serve people affected by human trafficking. And we serve about approximately 26% of those we serve here are considered to be chronically homeless with 3 or more episodes in a year or 12 months continually. As I said in the beginning, go ahead, Julie.
Trying.
Go ahead. We use the ABCD method, and some of you may or may not have heard of it. ABCD stands for the Asset Building Community Development Method. And Jim Green is the developer of that model. And early on in our planning stages to create a nonprofit, we attended a training through the Diocese of Olympia. So again, everyone in our community and all resources are assets in some way. People we serve, agencies, businesses, churches, and schools. Go ahead. All of our programs pre-pandemic here at Community Lifeline, all of our programs are trauma informed, and they're all pathways to housing for people. The programs that we do offer are a community meals program, again, using our assets of 18 churches and community organizations. We have about 250 volunteers that graciously look forward to coming and preparing meals, serving meals, providing hospitality here in our building to serve the community. Pre-pandemic, we also had a 6-month low barrier 35-bed capacity shelter, which was only open at night from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. From November through April 30th for individual adults 18 and older, individual adults without children. Many times that was contingent on temperature, and we live here in the Northwest where we get a lot of rain. And many times the temperature just didn't hit that 32 degrees. but when people get wet and cold, they are miserable. And so we were a little torn about that. One of our other programs is a shower and hygiene items distribution, which utilizes, again, community volunteers and staff, paid staff. We have 2 case managers that work with us here, and all intakes are entered into the homeless management information system. We can provide housing, educational, employment, financial literacy, addiction, mental health, and spiritual health resources here, all by wrapping around or using our community resources and assets that we have available to us. Job training and peer supports are also a huge part of what we do here. In fact, all of our shelter staff have experienced some form of homelessness, and every one of them have a story to tell, and who better to walk someone through the darkness than someone who has walked through it themselves, or to offer someone hope. And lastly, our outreach team mobilizes on the streets to offer shelter and other resources to people. When we go out in teams, we do that in different ways. We sometimes just pack up a bag of hygiene items, cards, information. Sometimes we take manna bags with us. Sometimes we take sandwiches or socks, hats, gloves, whatever the day might call for. And it gives us an opportunity to begin building relationships with people. Many of those we serve, we've had relationships with, some of them for 15 years. And the relationships have changed in different ways, but we continue to support them as they have come into community. Go ahead, Julie. So who are our community assets here in Mason County? So these are some for our community meals program. The 18 churches and community organizations provided over 35,000 dinners in 2020. And that was with a pandemic. Mason County Public Health is a great partner. We have 4 food banks and 2 gleaning programs and many, many community gardens that we have built relationships with and that provide food and other offerings for us here as well. School districts are great partners. They provide food donations, and we serve many of the same families. The school districts are great connections. Our restaurants here have provided cooks, food, and paper donations. Our fire departments have been just incredible. We never know when they're going to show up with a huge donation of hygiene items or pajamas or coats. We work closely with them. Oftentimes they will bring people to us here at the shelter. The police department has been one of our greatest assets and crisis response and public safety. And during a pandemic, we didn't have any crisis response. And we sort of had to just work together with the police department and create that ourselves. The sheriff's department is great for us because they go all over Mason County and they identify families or individuals in need. And sometimes they deliver supplies or food to the homeless camps or to families for us. We always have food in our building. We are always feeding people in our building and providing hospitality and love. And that is something that In building those relationships, people will call us and say, could you? And of course we can, and they'll deliver it for us. Mental health providers provide crisis response for us, and Mason General Hospital is our local hospital, again, providing cooks, food donations, and nutrition planning, which are all great skills that have been added to our food program. Our shelter program, what are our assets in our shelter program? So our greatest asset are our shelter guests. We learn from one another on a daily basis. And if we're not learning from one another, as I say, we need to be somewhere else. So churches and community organizations are also great assets. The Department of Corrections, they have provided us with sleeping mats and blankets. Many times they'll just call up and say, hey, we're in the warehouse today. We thought we'd bring some by for you. Is that okay? Of course it is. The community is so generous, providing us with clothing, coats, hygiene items, blankets, snacks, hot drinks, cleaning supplies, and of course, financial support. Again, an invaluable partner has been the Mason County Public Health and Police Department, Sheriff Department, Fire Department, mental health providers, addiction and recovery providers, our youth programs that serve 18 to 24, and our school districts. Our shower and hygiene distribution program is a part of our day programs from 10 until 3 days a week. We offer these to the community and to our shelter-in-place guests that are here. So the assets for that are our shelter guests, of course, who help with that. Our 2 case managers are also on staff that day, and we also have 2 peer supports that assist with that. And the community provides us with hygiene items, towels, snacks, and coffee. Again, public health. We also connect ourselves with consortiums and groups here in Mason County that are working on opioid overdose, because we have a high percentage of drug use here. So we are a part of the opioid overdose consortium, and we have people that we can call on that can come in and meet with people, that can offer treatment services, that can tell their story and help someone walk through the darkness. Again, Sheriff's Department, Police Department, the whole medical community, Mason General Hospital, and we have a team called the Mason County Quick Response Team. This team was put together, a mental health professional, an addiction specialist, and 2 peer supports or community health workers who are actually located right here at our building 2 days a week. They have a portable bus that has an office set up in it. They can do drug assessments, mental health assessments. They can transport people to inpatient services, and they are funded by a grant from our Central Mason County Fire Department. In March, of course, we were hit with the COVID pandemic. And in March, we were approached by Mason County Emergency Management Team and Public Health to become partners to educate and serve the homeless population in Mason County. COVID funding would be provided. We answered the call. Our mission was to provide a shelter-in-place 24/7 environment and education, a quarantine and isolation room, general population rooms for sleepings, screenings, 3 meals a day, showers and hygiene, sanitation inside and outside the building for up to 50 individual adult guests. I want to add something to this as well. We are not a shelter that has separate rooms or sleeping pods for people. We are a communal shelter. And so we had to assess our space with the emergency management team to create safe places for people. What needed to be done? Well, again, we have a 6,000 square foot building on 3 floors, and we are only using about half of it right now. But it needed to be assessed for the ideal placements of all designated quarantine and isolation rooms, which require their own restrooms and showers. You have to be able to close those off away from the other population if need be. The building and space were assessed for sanitation, shower, bed spacing, education needs, and we were able to lease sanitation stations, hand washing stations, education, and we posted educational information. We were required to post, according to COVID and emergency management, outside sanitation stations and hand washing, which was just protocol for allowing people to come into our building. We required hand washing before we came in. Our staffing resources were assessed for 24/7 services and increased from 8 to 15 staff members. Many of those came from guests we had served in the past, and we gladly welcomed them to our team. A kitchen and meal program assessments for staffing needs was we lost most of our volunteers for our feeding program because many of our volunteers are of the high-risk age, and so we had to hire a kitchen staff. So those needs were assessed and we put a team together. Supplies were assessed and requested. We just reached out to the community and purchased very few things. And then of course, activities were needed. We were going to have people here 24/7. They were going to need not only places to sleep and be, but they were also going to need activities that were safe. And so we were given donations of several TVs and DVD players and movies, arts and crafts. We have a library. We had puzzles and games that we brought together. So what needed to be done? Systems needed to be put in place for 24/7 year-round operation from part-time operation. And blessings amongst a pandemic. We saw this every corner we turned. Even though it was hard work, we saw the blessings. And I get emotional sometimes, and I love the people I serve here. So in May, capital funding became available from the Washington Department of Commerce for building improvements. And this was not only an answer to prayer, but it was a way for us to increase our shelter bed capacity and to have year-round services past the pandemic. This was an answer to prayer. It was also a way for us to get our sprinkler system put in our building, which was a fire requirement, fire code requirement, before we could go any further with using our building for anything more. And that happened amongst the pandemic with almost 50 shelter guests here in the building. It was pretty incredible. We lived amongst the construction. So we partnered with Mason County Public Health and the City of Shelton to write a very large grant. Our sprinkler system is now in place and looks very nice. And then after that happened, we had a community member come forward, and he wanted to honor his wife, who had served in this building for many, many years and had recently passed. And he, in her honor, wanted to rebuild one of our shower rooms and our restrooms. The shower room is finished and is enlarged. It is very, very accessible to anybody in the community, and you could get a very large wheelchair in it. And the restroom remodels are due to start any day now. During this pandemic, the community volunteers kept calling us, kept reaching out, those that had served here. They felt called to serve in new ways and continued to reach out. So although they weren't serving in the same way, many continued to serve in other ways. Some had clothing drives, some had coat drives. Many brought blankets in. Many switched their hourly service to a financial gift. Many couldn't come in and cook the meal, so they brought all of the food and left it for our staff to cook. There were just many, many ways that the community reached out during the pandemic. And of course, we followed COVID rules all the way around. Go ahead, Julie. So some of the observations and stories during the pandemic, we have been going since last March now, and it has not been an easy task. And our staff, our team, our family, our community here, as we gather, we reflect back. And during this time, there were no crisis response services, and 80% of our guests are affected by mental illness and 65% by addiction. And it required us to build those new relationships with the police department and with our state designated crisis responders. For those of you that may not know, if someone is in mental health crisis, there is quite a process in order to get them the help they need. And we work in systems right now that don't support that. And so in working with the state designated crisis responders, we were able to, first of all, become on first name basis with all of them. And second, to create a crisis response team with the Shelton Police Department to support our guests in crisis. Many times we had to provide the transportation, or we would find transportation for that person to get where they needed to be. When someone is in addiction and they are ready to get help, you don't drop the ball. You walk alongside them, you suffer with them, and you get them to the next step in their journey. And that's what we were able to do. So with stability and a sense of commitment for health and safety, our shelter guests were beginning to heal and address other needs in their lives. That's the hugest impact we've seen here, is that by providing stability for people here, they have a place to be. They have a place to call their own temporarily in transition. And they have begun healing and thinking and moving forward in their lives. When we first started this shelter in place in March, guests came to us and they wanted to be able to have in-person recovery meetings. And since we were a quarantine pod here, and since many of the in-person meetings were no longer meeting, we could do that. I reached out to the community and recovery resources poured in, and they started their daily meetings and supported one another in recovery. A community and a family was being built. It was about people living together in community. It was, first of all, bringing people back into community who had been marginalized, but then loving people, caring about people, showing them compassion, letting them build trust, and a community and a family was being built here. Many of our guests reconciled with their families, went to treatment or inpatient mental health facilities, and our community here at the shelter sent them off with a prayer circle and love, because we share love and prayer and worship together here. Many of our guests gained permanent housing and were sent off with love and prayers for the next steps of their journeys. And I get very emotional when I think about those prayer circles that send some off. There are a couple that just really have impacted me. One was a veteran who had been with us since last March, but he had also been staying in the shelter prior to that through the winter. And he gained housing in one of the veterans housing units in Ording. And the day that they picked him up in the van, there were 35 people socially distanced outside on our sidewalk. And he was amongst everyone, and there were tears of joy, and there were laughter and congratulations. And he has continued to stay in touch with all of us. I think another story that really stays with me is a young woman who has been disenfranchised from her family for years. And at 50 years old, one morning she woke up and said, you know, I think today's the day. I need to reach out to my family. I think I need my family back. That process on the phone happened over a course of a week, conversations back and forth. And just a week and a half ago, her family picked her up here. And again, we sent her off, yes, with love and prayers and thanksgiving. Another thing that we observed here, and it is a direct result of this pandemic, domestic violence has risen during this pandemic, and our women's population doubled in May, and all of them were affected by domestic violence, and our domestic violence shelter was full here. Our prayers were answered when another grant funding became available to increase our women's bed, focusing on that subpopulation of those affected by domestic violence. Today, every one of those extra beds every night had been filled since October 1st. And we were able to go back to October 1st and count one night of our 36 residents here, we had 21 women. And many of them were 60 years of age plus. And I don't know about all of you, but it really breaks my heart. Many of them had never been homeless before in their lives. Rents are going up. Investment groups are coming in and buying the affordable housing that is here. And they were on the streets for the first time. So we felt just very blessed that we were able to provide a place for them to be. And again, that grant not only provided for us to increase our beds, but that was the grant that tipped us over to year-round operation. And so another blessing amongst a pandemic. So reality did eventually set in. Since March, we provided education to our guests here and the community, and we had posters everywhere. We still do. We do a screening of temperature checks, hand washing, asking where you slept last night, or how long have you been in Mason County? Where did you come from? And we had no positive COVID tests in the shelter until Christmas Eve. And on Christmas Eve, after finishing our live stream service at St. Christopher's, I stopped at the shelter because we were going to pass out gifts. And a gentleman was experiencing some stomach flu-like symptoms. We immediately isolated him and took his temperature and attempted to do a COVID test, but it was inconclusive at that time. He was continued to be in isolation. 2 days later, he tested positive. And when his test came up positive, then we were required then to rapid test everyone here in the shelter. We were also working with public health. We had been trained on how to do that and to facilitate that. And so we set up our production and tested everyone. Out of that, we had an outbreak. We had 6 cases altogether, 2 staff and 4 guests. And trace contacting was able to identify all the common denominators. Of those 6, 5 of them were asymptomatic. Let me say that again. Of 6 cases, 5 were asymptomatic. 5 of those 6 are fully recovered, and 1 staff member will require longer rehabilitation and is continuing to heal and rehabilitate. We were able to, with public health, put our staff members in hotel rooms, and we were able to put our guests in our isolation room here. 2 of our guests had severe mental illness and ended up bolting from isolation. And so then public health took over and assisted us with that. Since that day, we've had no positive cases, and we continue to test everyone on a weekly basis. And we test people when they are wanting to check into the shelter. We test if someone is experiencing any symptoms at all. To date, all of our staff have been immunized. We're blessed to receive them with the healthcare essential workers. And now we're working with our local hospital, which is planning some mass vaccination clinics. They've had 2 here in Mason County already, but they are planning to come to our building and do a clinic here for the homeless population and our guests. And through this all, I shared with Bishop Greg Rickel. It's been like a whirlwind, and it's been a blessing, and it's been exhausting, and I wouldn't have been anywhere else. 6 months ago, I never would have believed that I would be called to develop a full-time residential shelter from the part-time homeless ministries we provided here. But I have never felt more authentic in my vocation as a deacon to bring the issues of the world to the church and the gospel and light of Christ to the world through this experience. One night I was sitting in the shelter upstairs at my desk where I'm sitting tonight, and I was just listening to the sounds in the shelter. Working upstairs in my office at the shelter, I was listening to the sounds, and someone was playing a beautiful guitar solo on an acoustic guitar in the room just below me, and I could hear everything. And comments of a delicious dinner being served, conversations about which movie to watch tonight, and 2 women were welcoming a new guest and assisting her to make her bed. Someone who attended our prayer circle to send someone off earlier in the day to rehab was sharing tears of joy with another guest. And it was raining for the first time in months, and everyone was out dancing in the rain. And all of this love and blessings amidst a pandemic, wildfire smoke, and continual construction in the building to increase capacity and provide a year-round shelter as a pathway to housing. Whenever 2 or more are gathered in his name, there is love. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara.
You're welcome.
What a story. Well, we have a few questions. Can you tell us on the average how many homeless people you serve every night? Just to get an idea of how many people you're serving.
Yes, so we have a shelter capacity of 50, and our average population on a nightly basis has been about 32 to 38.
Okay. And I had one person ask if the guests themselves actually play any assessment needs in helping assess the program. Do they do some assessment as well?
Absolutely, they are our number 1 assessors. We have morning meetings here after breakfast, and everyone attends. And in those meetings, we talk about what's working, what isn't working, what's your plan for today, and what can we provide for you? What would help you today?
So is your shelter open 24/7? Is that now?
It
Yeah.
is. We are now open 24/7 since March of 2020, and we are now providing a residential 24/7 shelter year round.
Do you have any requirements where people need to leave the shelter after a month or 7 weeks, anything like that?
Everybody that comes here receives an intake and an assessment. We are also an access point for coordinated entry into all other community services. And so we do an intake and an assessment of their needs. We put them into a housing plan. It is a person-centered plan. They are setting their own goals. We're walking alongside them, and we're supporting them in their goals. our case managers and our peer supports, and I'm just going to say shelter guests in general, support one another through their journey on a daily basis.
Barbara, there is a question about funding and how has all the funding been obtained? That question crossed my mind when you talked about it several times. And are you doing all the grant writing, or do you have a grant writer working with you?
Well, we have diverse funding sources here. The grants that we received were from the Department of Commerce, and I am the grant writer currently. And I have worked with community partners on that as well. We worked with the city as well as the county health department. And on one of the grants, they did a large part of it, and we all contributed to that. So funding sources, the Department of Commerce. We also get housing funding, the 2163 funding, from the filing fees for licenses and building permits. We also receive funding from United Way, the Community Foundation. The Community Foundation in both Thurston County and King County. We receive funding from many of our community groups, such as the Rotary Club, Kiwanis. I'm just thinking of the Lions Club, many churches. We have many, many pledges from churches and individuals. We have very diverse funding. We actually have had no fundraisers for 2 years. We do send out a mailer twice a year, and that is another way that we do some fundraising and get financial aid.
So those volunteers of yours, they provide 3 meals a day?
Yes, so we have a kitchen crew of 4, and there is always one of them in the kitchen at all hours of the day and night. And so the creative way that we have been able to continue to allow some of our teams to come in from churches is that they have agreed to be a quarantine pod. And that's a small group. And so it is usually 2 to 3 people. They plan their meal ahead of time. We have a backdoor entrance into the kitchen, and we can close the doors off from the kitchen. They come in and prepare the meal. They either put them in to-go boxes and then serve our shelter guests on trays, and then our staff serves them.
Barbara, what is the budget for the Community Lifeline? Your
That's
annual
a great
budget.
question. That is a great question. And I am going to say $387,000, a little over that this year. Up until this year, this year is the year that we were actually able to capture some larger grants. Up until this year, only 15% of our funding of less than $200,000 went to programming. And this year, with all the additional grants, our budget has increased a bit.
Are there other questions that people would like to ask? If you don't want to ask it yourself, you can put it in the chat and we'll ask. But if you want to unmute yourself, please do and ask Barbara whatever's on your heart. It's an amazing program, it sounds like.
Barb, what
Yeah.
are the shower and hygiene items that that you gather? Are they like the small hotel motel hotel bottles, or do you gather full-size bottles? What kinds of things do you offer?
That's a great question. We get both. So many people have known for years. We serve people on the streets, and so those smaller bottles are wonderful for folks that are carrying a backpack. But we also receive larger bottles because we have showers here, and the larger bottles will work better in the showers.
Do you have a way of separating, let's see, like wet from dry, people who might come in inebriated or on drugs and need to be in a quieter place and separated from those who are trying to stay clean?
That's a great question, and yes, we do. It is mostly about observation and an assessment when they check in. We assess people through that, and there's a safety check, and there's a place for them to secure their bags if they'd like to keep their belongings safe. And what's been really great is that, yes, there are people working on recovery here. And so there is a very large portion of the guests here in the shelter, many of them who are affected or are in recovery, who are working on their sobriety. And so it is really very interesting how supportive they are. We have different spaces around our building so that if we have someone in mental crisis who may not, who may have outbursts, again, keeping in mind, everyone is affected by trauma that we serve of some sort. And so we have spaces around the building that we can make accommodations for people. We have private spaces. We have different sleeping areas. We have 2 different sleeping areas for our women currently. And we are in the process of getting new carpet and new beds put in our remodeled women's room. Our men, it is a little more difficult because our men are all in a very large room. But again, we do have some spaces in the building where we can provide accommodations for people.
I'm assuming you have more men than women.
We do. We serve 70% women. Men on a regular basis.
Yeah, that's about the average. We have about 1 in 5 is a woman at our shelter. Do you have laundry services?
We provide laundry cards. We have a laundromat that we work with also, another asset, community asset, that is less than a block away. And we have very generous donors that bring us laundry cards every month. And we're able to provide those to our guests and to community members. And then we can also provide them with laundry soap and dryer sheets, and then do a warm handoff to the laundromat.
One of our laundromats here in town in Bozeman has 1 day a week that they are open for the homeless to use free of charge. So
Nice.
that circulates nicely and they can go in and get their laundry done then.
That's very nice.
Other questions that you might have for Barbara? When you said you used a trauma-informed design, we're just in the process here in Bozeman of actually trying to come up with a 24/7 homeless shelter. Right now, we're just like you are. We were open from November 1 until March 31, and we have snow on the ground for long periods on either side of those days. But the trauma-informed design, could you talk a little bit more about how you planned that?
Yes, thank you for asking. we discovered, before the term trauma-informed programs or trauma-informed was a key catchphrase in the industry, that we all along have provided our services in that manner. We have volunteers and staff here that are very compassionate and caring people and know that people are affected by trauma, and we don't want to re-traumatize them in any way. And so we are constantly thinking about our vets and PTSD and what some of their triggers might be. We're also thinking about our young women that are on the streets and what they have gone through and the trauma they have gone through. We don't want to be saying or doing or acting in any manner that might re-traumatize them, that might be trauma triggers for them. And we constantly talk about it here. Is that a trauma trigger? Is it possible? Is that a trauma trigger?
Some of the things to consider in trauma-informed design is actually the way your building is set out as well.
Yes.
In making sure that you have open spaces and you don't put people into
Yes.
tiny places where they'll be claustrophobic. That's part of the trauma-informed, is openness and, lots of light and being able to have tall ceilings so that there is not that feeling of closed in.
This has
Again-
been such a rich conversation, and I hate to break it into the conversation at a point when we have so much more we can say, but we've reached our bewitching hour and we need to say thank you so very much. I'd like to close us with prayer, and if anyone would like to stay on for a few more minutes, Barbara was gracious to offer to stay on to answer any other questions we may still have after we finish tonight's program. So if you don't mind, bow your head and reflect with me on the Franciscan benediction. May God bless us with discomfort at easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships, so that we may live lives deep within our heart. May God bless us with anger at injustice, oppression, and exploitation of people, so that we may work for justice, freedom, and peace. May God bless us with tears to shed for those who suffer rejection, pain, hunger, and war, so that we may reach out our hands to comfort them and turn their pain into joy. And may God bless us with enough foolishness to believe that we can make a difference in the world, so that you can do what others claim cannot be done, and to bring justice and kindness for all our children and to the poor. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen.
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 Barbara, thank you very much for all that you
Thank
shared.
you.
Penny and Roxy for facilitating things. We look forward to seeing you again next month.
Julie, we need to